Welcome to the Software Lifecycle Stories podcast. We bring you stories of what worked and sometimes what did not in the course of discovering, designing, developing, delivering, and using software based solutions, as shared by practitioners who went through these situations. Paramu Kurumathur, my guest today, has been in the IT industry for over 38 years. He has held various positions, including that of a worldwide CIO. Of late, he has been authoring various books, with one already published on project management, another fiction about to be published, and he is working on two more. In this freewheeling conversation, he shares a lot of his perspectives and experience in the industry. Listen on. Hi, Paramu.
Hi, Shiv. How are you?
Good. I think it's a little strange that we are in a semi-formal kind of discussion. We've known each other for a long time, and I'm hoping that there will be some new things that I will also learn about what you have been doing in the software industry. So, for the benefit of our listeners, can you start with a brief introduction of yourself?
Okay. My name is Paramu. Full name is Paramu Kurumathur. Right? I have been working in this industry for about 38 years now. I have a master's degree in computer science and technology. And I've worked in about five organizations now. This is my fifth organization, right? And I've worked in various roles like software developer to project manager, line of business manager, skills development manager, regional software services manager. I have set up an offshore development center for a very large multinational computer company. Right? And I have run that as a general manager for about 4 or 5 years. I've also dabbled in setting up my own company, funded by some industrialists from Calcutta. And I ran that for about 3 or 4 years. Of course, that was during the .com bust period. So the performance was generally average. So I left that. And after that, I joined International NGO as its CIO, which I did for about 11 years. After that, I joined this current organization, PM Power. And I've been with PM Power for the last 5 years. So this has been my experience. So I worked on. I've been a CEO. I've been a CIO. I've been a developer. I've been a project manager. So I worked in various roles in this industry and in various types of companies. So that's my experience. Wow, that makes you an ideal guest for the software lifecycle stories, where we want to look at pretty much all aspects related to software, from the conception to delivery to usage and all that. So a few things that kind of stand out is that now you have not only been on the production side, but also in trying to sell, in trying to solve problems. So let me start with, I have a lot of questions, with at least the first one. And in all your roles and over the years, how do you see the whole process of developing software changing? That's quite interesting. See, the first project I did was for a very large construction company in Orange County in the US, right? And I did some work doing COBOL project or product development, right? And those days, we didn't have these rigorous approaches and methodologies to software development. Somebody came and told me, hey, do this. So we did it, right? And these are very large programs that we were developing, right? So I remember one day, this lady who was the business analyst, she came to me and said, Paramu, can you make this change in the production system? Some small change. No problem. But In the evening of that day, she came back and said, "Oh, no, don't make the change." But then I told her, "Look, I've already made the change, and the change is in production, right?" So, oh, okay, then let the change be. So those days we didn't have this very rigorous approaches. So
That
it is
sounds like
almost
DevOps.
kind of development. Somebody told you to do something, so change was made almost immediately and then put into production. There was continuous integration, continuous value delivery those days, right? Then we came into this very rigorous waterfall approaches. So we have to have. I remember in the second and third projects, we used to have these very large requirement definitions phase. Once the requirement definition is over, we had a large design phase, a general design, then a detailed design, all these design phases. Then we had a actual coding phase, then a testing phase, and then there was some quality testing, all that kind of stuff. So we went through all these different stages, and the user saw the benefits of the whole development at the very end. And if there was a change in between, we had to go through this laborious change process, like, oh, you had to make the changes in the requirements, in the design, in the detailed design, in the code, in the test cases, and then make sure that everything is working. So this is that whole. Initially, when we started, there was nothing but a quick change approach. Everything changed to a very rigorous, formal approaches. Now we are back into agile, which again says, make quick changes, make sure that you're able to deliver continuous value to the customer, and embrace change. And I remember in the second phase, we would frown on changes. So if somebody came and told you, make this, we'd say, no, we can't. Right? So I think the whole, the cycle has gone through everything is cyclic. They say in the universe, everything is cyclic. So this thing also has gone through the third phase now. No, I don't know. Maybe after 20 years, agile may change and we'll go back to a very rigorous definition phase. We don't know. So this is what I've seen over the years of working in this industry.
That's interesting. So as a person who has played these multiple roles, and also having seen some of these, let's say the not so formal, as well as the more agile approaches and so on, in addition to, let's say, the technical qualities or technical skills that one needs, what do you think would be needed for someone to be successful and also, say, grow in career? Okay, each person might have a different aspiration, either be completely technical or, like you have been a major influencer of outcomes, in your global NGO role. What are some of the softer aspects that one needs to master?
Okay, see, some of the softer aspects. I remember when I was working in this NGO, most of the users are fairly clueless about what is needed to develop a software system, right? I mean, we had about 40 countries. I had about 40 countries in my ambit, right? And most of the country directors or most of the directors of the international organization, they were fairly clueless about what software development is. All they knew is that, oh, I'll give you some requirements. You have to develop a database. They called it a database, right? So they didn't call it a system. They called it a database, right? So, for example, I remember one of the users who was the head of HR of the NGO International. He came to me and said that he wanted to develop a system for something. I forgot what it was. So I did a quick estimate and told him it'll take 3 months. So he said, 3 months? My son can do it in 1 day. My son is every day doing software development, using Excel and quick basic, and he's doing things so fast. This small system, he'll do it in 1 day, right? So I told him, okay, then he'll get it done by his son. No, but actually, the funny thing was that he didn't really know what it takes for software to be developed. All he thought was, do some coding and that's it, right? So I had to kind of educate him about the whole process of software development, how maintainability, how it has to be used, testing, design, all those aspects. So, and how it should all fit finally into the overall architecture of of the organization. So he was fairly clueless. So it took a long time for me to actually make some of these people understand, right, what software development is all about, right? And I remember when after I joined this organization, I went for some country directors meeting, and their idea of IT was really fixing computers, right?
Oh, okay.
So I remember one country director came to me and said, "Oh, you are the big IT boss. Can you fix my computer for me?" Right? So their whole concept of IT was fixing computers. One of the first things I had to do when I joined this organization was to create an international IT strategy for the whole organization, right? Which then really explained what it means to actually have a software architecture for the whole organization, and how to develop systems, how to take legacy systems and then plug them into the existing architecture, and how to change certain things, right? And this organization was dependent very heavily on something called child sponsorship, right? So individuals would sponsor a child and give some money to their organization in the name of the child.
Okay.
So this whole child sponsorship system was spanning all the countries, maybe about 36 or so of these 40 countries where child sponsorship was active, right? So to have such a system developed, right, and making sure that everybody is in agreement with the provisions of the system, that again took a very long time. And one of the key problems there was, if you went to a small country like Botswana, the connectivity was very poor, right? Many of the African countries, the connectivity is very, very poor. So many of these online systems could not actually work well. So that is another learning, that sometimes you need to have offline versions of these systems just so that they could enter the data whenever they could, and then connect it at night or something to send it into the main system. So, these are some of the learnings, and these are some of the things that you had to influence the country directors and others to get things implemented.
I'm sure it must have been a very challenging thing to create this global architecture. But then from a cultural point of view, the reason I'm asking is I remember in one of the projects that I was involved with, that the hierarchical nature of organizations in Japan, for example, made the software kind of unusable, because the software let a deputy or an admin to manage, let's say, the boss's calendar. So did you have any instances where these cross geo or across country kind of cultural differences had to be taken into account when you deployed these global solutions?
Not as much as the difference between Japanese and cultures and Western cultures, because if this NGO was based is a London-based or a UK-based NGO, right? It's a British NGO, right? And therefore, most of the countries we operated in were British influenced countries, right? Or Anglophone countries. But of course, there were certain countries which are not, and there we had a problem. For example, there were countries like Mozambique, Angola, which had Portuguese, or Guinea-Bissau, right? Brazil had Portuguese, and many Spanish countries in the Latin American region, right? And it's very interesting, some cultural things, where some people felt that they were actually discriminated against, by English imposition. For example, I remember the country director of Guatemala, right? He told me, hey, look, why can't we have these things in Spanish? Why is this in English, right? And sorry, this is not Guatemala, this is Peru, right? Why can't it be in Spanish and not in English? Then I said, yeah, we can try to do things in Spanish, and it's kind of had some preliminary discussions with him. Later on, I was talking to him about local languages in that region. And one of the languages was Quechua. So I asked him, do you do some of your discussions, etc., in the local language? He said, no, Spanish is enough. Right? So basically for him, not learning the local language but doing things in Spanish was not an imposition. But English coming onto him was an imposition. So, so people had very interesting things about how you feel discriminated against, but you don't feel the discrimination you're doing to the others, right? So that's something that I learned, saying that, oh my God, you have to be very careful about, you feel the victim in certain cases, but you don't feel when you are victimizing others, right? So that's one cultural thing. And of course, the other thing that in our organization, which I encouraged, right, was, for example, when people wrote, say, documents, I was of the opinion that we should let people write documents the way they want to write, and not actually edit their English. So a person from Nigeria would have a certain kind of English, a person from Botswana, another kind of English, right? And of course, when you look at it from a British point of view, you will find that the English is not very accurate. Right? There were grammar mistakes, spelling mistakes. But I said, that's fine. This diversity is fine. Yeah? You should be able to handle different kinds of Englishes, like you can handle different kinds of languages. So that is another cultural thing that I found. The other thing that I found was to influence. If many a time there's a lot of politics between international and countries, between regions and countries. So one of the things that I found was that if you can get a couple of those country directors on your side, then they can then form your bulkhead, or your your bridgehead for introducing some of these technologies in the other countries. So yeah, these are some of the cultural things I think I found when I was working in these countries.
Yeah, talking of languages, I know that you have a passion for languages, and in some other conversations, you have a very nice way of comparing languages or going to the etymology and then trying to derive some similarities and all that. So with respect to software development, do you think that there is something to learn for particularly designers to abstract or find these patterns and solve for those patterns rather than do a point solution?
Yeah. Are you talking about in any context? Can you look for patterns like you look for patterns in languages? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's what I see you doing very naturally. In talking about languages, you are able to compare the origins, saying these are similar, these are the reasons why some variations are there and all that.
Right.
So many times we find that the thinking between project and product, particularly in Bangalore being a startup hub,
right,
solve problems in a more generic way or create platforms rather than programs.
Right.
So when one has to do that, are there things that we can learn from these kinds of disciplines like linguistics that will help people learn solving problems in a more generic way?
I've not really thought about this. It's a very interesting approach. In fact, I'm just when you talked of this, I was just thinking of Miss Marple. Agatha Christie's character.
Yeah.
The way she solved crime was by comparing the psychology of the characters in the current story with the psychology of the characters in another story, right? Or in this particular situation, she was like her and she behaved this way, and therefore this person could be the killer, kind of thing. So you're asking of that kind of a pattern. I haven't really thought of that for software or requirements in the industry. But maybe you're right. Maybe we could actually do such a thing, right? We could actually think of finding patterns between different kinds of. In fact, that's already been done, I suppose. For example, you would find that even terminologies used in the software industry are very like terminologies in some of the other industries, in the industrial era industries, except that the whole concept has changed. So patterns have been taken from here and bunged here, but I don't know whether in the development of systems, we have actually applied, I have not really thought of applying these patterns. But it's a good idea. Maybe we can think about it.
Yeah. Okay. Continuing on the language and communication bit. One of the areas where invariably errors creep in is in either specifying things right or in interpreting those specifications and creating solutions.
Right.
Now, with your expertise in being a communicator, as an author, writer, and all that, how do you make sure that if you are describing a scene, for example, that the minute details are not missed out, or when you are defining a character, what kind of behavior or what kind of interactions and so on, which can probably be useful for someone, let's say, gathering requirements or modeling a problem area, and in communicating with the others who are involved in the software development?
If you went back to, for example, writing a novel, right now, see, one of the first things they teach you when people teach you how to write a novel is you have to take a character and then look at the character and then try to, even if some of these aspects do not come out in a novel, you should internalize that character completely, right? Knowing, what is the character's childhood background? What are some of the scenes that he did when he was a child, right? So that slowly, even within your own mind, you can actually build that character up, right? So that the character behaves to character, later on, right? And they also say that if some character behaves out of character, that you can look for a clue of some wrongdoing or some, it's a clue that person could be a dangerous fellow, right? So right in the beginning, you have to figure out the basics of that character. Similarly, in software development also, I suppose, you have to, for any requirement, for any feature, I suppose you need to know the full aspects of that feature, right? If you're doing, say, agile development, a feature that the customer wants implemented, right? If the development people know how the feature fits into the big picture of the whole system, that makes it easy. And also why that feature is and where did the idea of that feature come from. So if we know all those things, right, then I think it's much easier to develop that feature. That is, if the developers understand that feature very well, it's much easier to develop it. Just like writing. So even though if some of the aspects of that feature does not come out in the actual final delivery, right? Even then, if you knew some of the basic needs of the feature, it will be good. So this is like writing a character in a book, right? So this is one of the key similarities that I found in this thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really useful, because I hear teams using techniques they call as personas.
Right.
But then the persona seems more static and based on assumptions. But I think that can be a lot more richer if, like you said, we can go into the character of that persona and maybe some background and stuff like that. Because many times you also find that the intended use and the actual use or how it is used, could vary.
Right.
Yeah. So
right.
Have you had any instances where, like your manufacturing company example that you gave, where things kind of changed even during the day, that you plan a global rollout, you do things, and suddenly say that, no, maybe this is not what we should be doing?
I remember once developing a software for an organization. This was a screen print company somewhere in California, right? So we developed a large software for them. It's, I think, some kind of accounting software, right? And by the time we finished developing, we found that the person who was in charge of that development with the customer, he had left the organization, right? And it was he who was actually pushing for this pushing this particular requirement of this accounting system, right? He said that we can get rid of the old system, have a new one. So when this guy left, suddenly the need for the system just vanished, right? Right? And I remember the whole system that we developed. And I'm sure you remember when we developed this. You were also a project manager then in another project. We spent nights and days developing the system, and finally, the whole thing was cut onto a tape and given to the customer. The customer gave us our money, everything done, and then he never used it. Right. So this is something which sometimes for a developer and for anyone associated with the project, it's a big letdown. Of course, as an organization, as a development organization, we got our money and it was successful from our point of view. But we are not very sure from what the final outcome was, right? And I suppose, therefore, I think we need to figure out, as development organizations, we need to also know what the final use of that system is. And if the final use of the system is clearly known, then I think we'll be much better at developing systems. And of course, if we also know the politics, it'll be much easier. If, for example, the marketing or the salesperson on the ground in California knew that there was this politics, maybe this whole thing need not have even come up, right? Of course, it would have been bad for us because we would have lost that kind of an opportunity. But at the same time, so I felt that sometimes needs can completely change, right? And I know there's, even in that NGO, we had situations where a new head of a particular department would come in. He'd want a new system developed. He'd say, the old system is all bad, throw it out. So we developed this new system for him. Then it took 3 years to develop the system, right? And he left, that this whole system was junked, right? So sometimes you find that changing circumstances do change the need for having systems. And of course, there are cases where people have come and said, no, for me, this is not important in the system, but the other thing is. When the previous manager wanted something else, right? So we had to shift things around, shift the priorities of the features of the system around. Yeah, so as I said, yes, you find that sometimes things do change drastically, as you go along, Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for taking me back on the memory lane. I had almost forgotten the time when we were the first project managers and we were kind of pretty much learning on the job with some unconventional approaches and all that. Maybe that's a topic for another day. But then,
in fact, Shiv, I think we remember that when we became project managers, we were not trained to become project managers. There was no training. Those days, there was nothing called project management training, right? Or software project management training there was no such concept. Right? There was project management training in the industrial sense, but nothing like software project management training. So we had to kind of learn as we kind of rolled along,
Right.
Yeah.
That triggered another thought, which is, I remember in those days, the computing resources were very scarce.
Right.
So we, of course, in hindsight, the games that we used to play even between the two of us to make sure that our teams get the prime time on the computer.
Right.
Trying to work in shifts and all that. Maybe some of those could have been avoided if we knew that the customer was not using it. But then on a little more software development related point, because the computing resources were scarce, probably the due diligence that the team members paid, or I remember even when we were learning, we had to do desk checking of programs and all that. Today, you can on your desktop fire off any number of compiles, builds, and all that, and then do things. So, do you see a change in the approach that people take to developing solutions today. Just like you said that the methodologies are somewhat cyclic. Do you see any changes or going back to some of the basic principles and practices?
No, as I said, in the olden days, I remember when I first joined my first organization, we didn't even have a computer on our premises. And we had to go and use the computer of a sister organization, right? And during that time, I remember, we used to sit and write programs on these coding sheets, those sheets with, it looks like a graph sheet, So you write environment division, what's some other procedure division, etc. on those little boxes, right?
Yeah,
and then write the whole there, right? And then you would write as you said, we did a lot of desk checking to make sure the programs would run, right? And the advantage those days was that we wrote really structured code, mainly because we wanted to be able to do desk checking, right? If we did any, thousands of go-tos, from here to there, you would find that, it's not easy to desk check, right? So I think where computer resources are scarce, you find that you do really good programming techniques to ensure that you are able to understand the program well. And therefore, what I found was that when you actually loaded this program onto a computer, it would run in 2 or 3 tries, right? Because you've done a lot of checking already, and your brain has worked on things before the computer could work on it, right? And but when I went to the US and did some conversion program from CDC systems to CDC environment to IBM environment, there when I started converting programs, COBOL programs, one environment to the other, of course there will be some errors due to the changes in environment. And to actually debug was actually a problem. And because those people had very high computing resources, and these programs are built over a long period of time. So, and you would have these large printouts, right? So you would start in the procedure division, go to the first paragraph and say, do this, do that, do that. Then if something, go to somewhere else. So you would search for the whole printout. It's like a book, go through and find out where the label is. And there'll be 2 or 3 sentences, and it'll say, if something, go somewhere else, right? So the lack of structured programming as systems built up, and the initial structured programming that we did because there were no computing resources, that was a big contrast in those days, right? And as time passed, and when you could do online programming, right, and online debugging and online compiling and running it, then things became much easier, right? Because then you could actually understand, and that's when we slowly started building this habit of, making mistakes and then correcting them, right, by trial and error kind of approach rather than actual, real, systematic coding, right? So when you had enough computing resource in your hands, you could actually write something. Does it work? It does not work. Therefore, you write something else. So the whole trial and error approach started once you had big computing resources at your supply. So I think that is the kind of change that we found.
Okay. This is another question. Maybe just a simple answer. Now, is this the reason? This meaning the abundance of computing resources, one of the main factors why the 4GLs died? Because I know that you are one of the probably very few experts in 4GLs, having worked with the team that developed that and developing solutions and all that. Remember Link?
Right.
So did it go away because whatever benefits it had are now more easily possible, or you can do more things because of computing power being available to everyone?
That could be one reason. The other reason I think is that, these 4GLs like Link and Mapper, right? They all actually addressed some of the things that you have to do in the background for the environment, right? For example, in COBOL, you have to actually code the environment division, the data division, the what's the other, all those various divisions before you actually came to the procedure division, right? And so these 4GLs actually made sure that you didn't have to worry about any of those background things, right? But most of the actual, if you had any complicated logic, that would still need to be done. The other thing it did in those days was actually the design of the screen, right? Those days, screen design was a major task if you didn't have a 4GL. So this thing actually made screen design very easy, right? And also it kind of brought out some of the standard ways accounting systems worked, right? So, you had these master files and these transactions. So some of those things were made easy, right? So those standard things for classical application systems were made slightly easier because the environment, because of some standardization, right? But later on, we found that most of some of those things are already available in the operating system environment itself as time went on, right? So the whole need of a 4GL kind of collapsed, right? And nowadays, if you look at programming, most of the programming is done for systems kind of work rather than application kind of work. Most of the application kind of work, I think all these modules are already available in the open environment, so you can just pull things in and do things, right? But some of these systems kind of thing, you really need to develop your own systems, right? And that is where I think the whole death of 4GLs happened, right? Because the whole need for them didn't kind of died away. Of course, as I said, the abundance of resources also helped, right? But in the olden days, I think these 4GL creator systems, even though the developers of the 4GL claimed that they were more efficient, it may not have been. It would have taken more computer resource to run such systems than if you were to code it in a 3GL.
Okay. In the last half an hour or so, we covered a lot of ground.
Right.
We talked about changing user requirements, changing technologies, changing ways in which people have been developing and all that. Now, with all this, my last question for this session is a CIO's job challenging and satisfying, or is it something that is not aspirational? Because we also have a lot of people who are aspiring to be CIOs among our listenership.
And yeah, CIO's job is really challenging, especially if it's an international organization, right? Because you're mainly dealing with the strategy of the international organization rather than just software development alone. And also, if a real CIO, if he or she is taken seriously enough by the organization to form part of the organizational strategic teams, right? In many cases, CIO is not taken seriously enough, right? You'll find that many cases CIO is just as a computer fixer kind of guy, right? But if the CIO becomes part of the CIO is not reporting into the HR head or the finance head, but the CIO is part of the directorate team of the organization and is actually feeding into the strategy of the organization. Then I think the CIO is certainly a very important person in the whole organization, right? And now in this digital age, of course, the importance of I don't know whether you can actually call them the CIO now, because now many of these organizations are developing systems for the computer to be used by the computer, to be used in the computer, right? So everybody is a CIO now. And with these new agile approaches, with self-organization, etc., I think, maybe the role of the CIO will kind of fuse with that of the CEO. Right? The CIO and the CEO are the same person. You find that in many organizations, you find that is true. And then you also have something called the CTO now, the Chief Technology Officer, right? So the questions of what is the CIO, what is the CTO? I mean, it's always been used kind of interchangeably, right? So all those things come in. So I think, yes, now I think there is also this concept of chief digital officer, right? So I think
The
people
chief data
aspiring to,
officer.
huh?
Yeah, chief data officer, chief digital officer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I think people trying to become these, I think it's good for them, because in this current kind of industry, the whole organization is some kind of computer. So I think it's good for people to aspire to that kind of thing, rather than the traditional CIO kind of role, which is a chief data officer kind of thing. Not data, but chief, what is it called? Head of the data, what's it? Computing data department.
Yeah, MIS department.
MIS, that kind, yeah. So once you get past that, I think it's a good aspirational role.
Thanks. Good to hear. It's very reassuring. Even though the part when you said the organization as a computer reminded me of Matrix.
Yeah.
Then is it cyclic or is it more squarish? I don't know.
Yeah. I think, see, over time, I think maybe some 300, 400 years from now, I don't know how the whole thing will be. Of course, we won't be around to see it, right? I think the thing may change. Maybe the whole of human brains will kind of fuse together into one gigantic brain. Talking telepathically across through some waves across dimensions to each other. Right? Maybe there'll be people on Mars and maybe on the moon, right? So we don't know. How things will change, right? Yeah. So let's.
Yeah, I think that is fine, because we are recording this at the turn of the year, and the time for predictions and futuristic expectations and all that. So that is wonderful, Paramu. Very nice talking to you. Thanks for making the time.
Thank you, Shiv. It was great talking to you. I think I enjoyed this. I also learned some things which I didn't know myself, and things that came out without, even my thinking about them. So it's good. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye. If you like the show and would like to share your experiences with the community, or know someone else who might want to do that, please get in touch with us at podcast@pm-powerconsulting.com. That is podcast at pm-powerconsulting.com.